It's a huge honour to be able to welcome John Amaechi today. He's somebody I've admired for a very long time. And if you were actually to print off his CV and kind of lay it out in the ground, it would be longer than he is tall. It's incredible how much he has done in his life and how much he continues to do. If you were to read down this CV, it would be highlights like, obviously, a professional athlete, very successful in the NBA, a doctorate in psychology, an OBE, an entrepreneur, a philanthropist, a father, an inspirational speaker, a coach. The list goes on and on and on. So can you please put together your hands for a very warm welcome for John Amaechi.
Thank you. I feel slightly concerned I've been oversold. It's always a danger in these things. I have to be honest with you, when we start off, I'm normally very good at, as a psychologist, you have to be very good at washing away a previous experience, whether it be with a client or something else, so that you can focus on the next client or something else. And I'm furious this morning. But before you, I don't want to make this is not deeply political. I am disappointed in the referendum, but that's not why I'm furious. I'm furious because I voiced my disappointment this morning on Twitter, which, as we all know, is the way that you voice your disappointment nowadays. And I will admit that I can be pompous at times. That is an understatement, my friends would say. And that I am fond of using the correct word to describe the emotion. But this morning, I have been called elite so many times. One of the tweets that referred to my elitism said, "It's not surprising that people think you're elite when you use words like obtuse and terrible." And now I find myself in an agitated state I can't climb down from, because here I am at a Festival of Education, staring into the gaping maw of a country that is becoming increasingly anti-intellectual. And I do mean that in every way possible. So not just that intellect is not respected, experts are not respected, but in fact there is now some kind of personality bonus for being purposefully ignorant. And I think this is an incredibly dangerous place to be when trying to make sure that education is fit for purpose, when trying to extol the virtues of education. In of itself, the idea of knowledge in of itself is a good thing. The application of it as an extra good thing, frustrating. So I thought I'd voice that just because otherwise it's going to buzz around in my brain and spoil everything. I work a lot with schools in the UK, in the EU, in America especially. I work with entire school districts in the States, Chicago, Cleveland, Denver, a couple of others, working with their teachers and executive leaders on some of the serious problems that are faced. I think sometimes we look at the challenges we face, which I accept are significant in education, for any number of different reasons. And we don't do a good job of looking around and realizing, whilst I don't think comparing to a bad example is a good thing, sometimes we have to take some refuge in the fact that other places really are in a completely different space in terms of the trouble they have in education. In America, I'm working with teachers, schools on staff and teacher engagement and resilience, student engagement and pastoral care, inclusion challenges, including one school district I work with that is almost entirely apartheid. The black kids go to some schools, the white kids go to other schools, the Latino, Chicano kids go to another school. I mean, just radical problems, and I'm not suggesting we don't have some semblance of that, but levels of school violence that are certainly not ones we can consider here. Differential achievement, which I know is a problem across the board. And for many of these schools, trying to get a grasp of the difference between having a vision for your students in your school and having targets that you have to meet. So it's a really challenging landscape out there, and I just I like to point out at the very beginning, I don't envy the task of teachers. I envy the role that they have and the important role that they can play. I don't envy the task around them. But some of the things I want to talk about are some of the ways that I'm working with these institutions on what I believe is a distributed leadership model, where I'm not really, although I work a lot with exec teams, I'm working with them on how that they can instill this idea of leadership, a proactive decision-making power throughout the school, not just from the top 5 or 6 people within it. And so I wanted to talk about some of these ways. And the first of the ways might seem a little antithetical to the whole theme, in that I really think one of the things we have to focus on nowadays is the resilience of the teachers themselves, of educators themselves, faced with increasing challenges, this broad scope of targets to meet, young people to educate, which are not always the same thing, and a pastoral duty that seems borderline parental at times. There's a huge responsibility on teachers. And so one of the things we have to work on is how are we going to make our teachers more resilient? How do we help them to move away from that place where they are constantly working in the red zone? If you imagine the rev meter in a car, constantly working with the needle buried in the red zone. Because nobody can be great at their job if that's where they are. And some parts of the work that I do include working on like quiet mental time. Many teachers will recognize the idea that there just is no quiet space, either in their head or actually around them. And how do they create that? Mindfulness techniques, which a lot of people, I think, scoff at, mostly because I think mindfulness as a thing has been hijacked by people with finger symbols and incense sticks who think that mindfulness is about sitting around in a circle and humming, when really it's about a technique for creating space for thought, space for emotional literacy, space for resilience. And so we do a lot of work with that. Directed reflection, changing the way we do feedback with each other, so that we're not simply asking for it once a year or getting it when we do something terrible, that we have moments where, for no other reason than collegiality, we can spend time with each other, reflecting back on our daily practice and reflecting back on the good things we do that often go missed by those who aren't expert, those who aren't in situ. I also encourage people to do additive activities, so stuff that is part of the recuperative strategy that helps them. And for some people it's dancing, for some people it's swimming, it's very personal. But many people think that the way to rest is to get home, books go down, bags go down, and you just sit and vegetate, and your mind whirs from the day, and the stress swirls around you. And we've got to find ways to help people realize that even though it requires extra energy, some of these additive behaviors, whether it's swimming or whatever it is for you, for me it's riding my bike this morning at 4:45 around Regent's Park, because the frustration of this morning got too much. But we have to find ways to do that. There's really good science behind this too. I mean, it's I'm not a big fan of the idea that sports has answers for lots of things. I think sports is responsible for a lot of bad things. But when I played, it really helped when suddenly I understood that success, achievement, meeting goals was not about burying yourself in the red line all the time. I worked out in the summer in Arizona. It's not where I played, but it's where I lived in the summertime. And when I went there, I trained every day, 8 hours a day throughout the summer, with breaks. But you would go so hard all the time, and that would just be your expectation. You arrive, you're on full, and you go. And then I met a trainer who questioned all that, saw that we were getting diminishing returns from our burying ourselves in the red zone, and insisted one day that we all stop doing our running, all stop doing our sprinting, all stop doing whatever we were doing, and we walked over to where there was this outdoor pool, and he was like, "Get in." And we didn't know what was going on. Is this some kind of weird punishment? Are we going to be drowned? And we got in the pool, and as I've seen with many teachers, we got in the pool and we all stood there with the water up to our waists. We're tall, right? So we were stood there with the water up to our waist, just kind of waiting, as if we'd forgotten about play, as if we'd forgotten about fun, as if we'd forgotten about recuperation and rest. And we just stood there waiting for our next instruction. And he's like, just relax. And we stood there. And eventually it took 5 minutes, but then we're lying in the water, whatever else. And I remember when we got out of that pool, it was as rejuvenated as I've felt in a long time. I felt younger, more able to re-attack. And this recuperation is a serious part if you want to be a person who can handle the stress, the crucible of school. But it's something that we don't address because I think sometimes we think teachers are robots that don't need any of this type of work. One of the other things that I work on with schools is the idea of proactive collegiality. There is a difference between being a co-worker and a colleague. It's manifestly different in the resources that are shared, in the support that you feel, and the successful outcomes that you get. It's not about friendship and it's not about niceness. Niceness is a word that I hate. Nice is a word that I hate. It's a typically British Trojan horse word. Any word that you can use the way nice is used should be abandoned. Nice is what you say when someone gives you an undesirable gift at Christmas. Thank you, this is really nice. And in that word, inside of it, waiting to bubble out the moment it's appropriate, is the idea that I hate this gift, and I hate you for giving it to me. And when you leave, I'm going to rewrap it and give it to somebody I care equally little about. So this is not about niceness. Collegiality is not about niceness. It's about performance. It's about seeing each other almost as training partners, if you want another sports analogy. People who are sensitive to each other's vacillations, so you can tell when someone's down and you pick them up. You can tell when someone's too hot and you cool them off. Colleagues have an explicit declaration that they will seek out and give constructive feedback, constructive reflection, and not just at formal occasions, but any time it can be offered. I have a community center in Manchester. We have about 3,000 kids a week going through our doors, and we have a technique between our coaches because sports has a different context, cultural context, and the rules of it, even though I think sports and sports coaches should be treated like educators, or rather they should behave like educators. There is a context there where dangerous stuff can very quickly happen in sport. And so we have this thing where our mindsets and our behaviors must constantly be checked. Otherwise, we get caught up in the heat of passion or disappointment or whatever else. And so we have a system whereby if there's multiple people in the gym, if there's lots of stuff going on, coaches are charged with making sure they look to their colleagues on other courts, on the sideline, wherever they may be. And if they spot something they think might be damaging to them or to the young people, they intervene. And we want to make sure, of course, that we're not intervening in big, dramatic ways that cause massive fallout, but rather, you see something happen, a coach is getting too hot, and you walk over to them, and all you do is you put your hand on the shoulder. You leave it there until it's acknowledged, and then you're done. You walk away. This signal to our coaches means whatever's happening right now should probably stop, and we will talk about it afterwards, and I will explain what I saw. And that's the deal. The deal is you stop whatever you're doing, however righteous you think it is, however right you think you are. But then the deal is it doesn't get left hanging in the air because colleagues don't do that to each other. We then circle back and talk about what happened and whether you thought it was right or not, how it was perceived by the people around you. And this way, this kind of deep reflection can happen in everyday activities, and we diminish the stuff that happens that damages our environment and turns it from a learning environment into something far more confrontational. These are some examples of how you turn schools or any environment into areas where people are colleagues and not just co-workers passing like ships in the night. This, I mentioned already that one of the other ways that that I work with schools, and one of the other ways I think we have to really focus on now is that targets are killing us because they are, by definition, deeply uncompelling. They're deeply uncompelling to educators. They're deeply uncompelling. If there was something more I could say, to students. It just doesn't mean anything. So we have to find a way to fulfill targets, obviously, but also we have to find a way that they don't become the end to it all, because nobody can drive towards something. It is impossible to do something challenging if the thing you're aiming for is banal. And the numbers, the targets, the percentages, whatever it is, these are banal to students. And the real challenge with schools is that you have to find a way oftentimes to create a vision for your community, a vision for individual students that is tailored, because not all students will have that same drive and that same passion or that same intellect. I talk about, when I was younger, I used to love science fiction books. I reread them now on holiday. I loved science fiction, and I loved the idea of a future history that science fiction is full of. A future history is the idea that the author paints a picture of the future so vivid that it's as if it's already been lived. And you are recalling something you've already experienced when Asimov talks about this world where almost sentient robots walk freely with human beings and aliens. When they talk about pills for food or whatever else it is, they make it so compelling that you can close your eyes and you see yourself there. And this future history is the nature, it's the kind of vision that we have to create in schools, both for teachers, educators, and for the students to feel compelled. Martin Luther King is a perfect example of someone who used a future history. When he was trying to get what I would suggest is more strident change than even we are trying to pursue. He didn't talk about how this law is unfair and that person is mean and these things are wrong and we should change these so we can be fair. In so many of his speeches, he talked in pictures in a way that made it so easy, whether you were white or black, whether you were Republican or Democrat, to see a world when you closed your eyes where black boys and white boys did play together and nothing terrible happened, where people integrated and mixed and learned together and nothing terrible happened. A vision for the future that was so compelling that for those who had to fight through terrible difficulties to get there, and for those who just thought it was natural, it drew them along, increased their motivation. And for many schools that I work with, that vision is lacking. There's a statement, there's a vision statement, and then there's goals, targets. But the vision is missing and nobody's bought into it. The big part, which I suppose is the bit of this that I think is the most important, and had I not had the morning I'd had, I probably would have started here, is educators. It is what teachers do every day outside of the actual process of teaching. Their interpersonal interactions is the key. They tell students whether they are going to be a success or not. When I grew up, I was the biggest, fattest, blackest thing in Stockport. And nobody had seen anything like me. I thought I was a unicorn. But in my family, before the age of 11, essentially my primary school was almost across the street. And so my time was just spent with my mum and my two sisters and with kids that were in that stage of their own cognitive development where they didn't think I was so crazy different. And in that moment, the looking glass of other people's faces didn't matter so much. The looking glass of my mother and my sisters was vital and the most consistent thing. And when I looked into their faces, I knew who I was. I knew I was the kid who at 7 years old was reading Asimov. I knew I was the kid who was smart. My favorite memories are of us on holiday in Rhyl, and that's such a weird sentence to say, actually. And we had a caravan, and obviously it would rain all the time, much like yesterday here, and the sound of rain on the tin of the roof, and I would look around this tiny little space, and all of us would have our face buried in books, and we'd just look at each other and smile, and I was like, yes, I'm the smart kid. My first day of secondary school, after a trip on the bus that I couldn't really understand, because I got on the bus and I couldn't understand why, when I sat down, people got up and moved away. I couldn't understand why they kept an eye on me on the bus. Then I got to school, and in my first assembly, I'm trying to be as invisible as possible, which is not easy. And Mr. Stewart, the physics teacher, but also the rugby master, walked over to me and said, "But of course you'll play rugby." And I'm thinking, but I like books and pie. I do not like the idea of going out in the winter in England and being a target for other people to hit. So I was like, no, I am not going to play rugby. And then he walked away. And then I overheard him as he talked to 3 other older boys, members of the rugby team, and he said no. He said no. And then he said, if he's not going to play rugby, what use is he? And then I realized that my mother and my sisters had lied to me for 11 years. I was not the smart kid. I was something else. The way we interact with people is not just about decorum and niceness. It informs their identity. You can turn a girl who should be outstanding in maths and engineering and physics into one that can't conceive of why they should bother. Claude Steele and numerous other researchers now have done detailed work in this. We can inform people's identity and tell them whether they're worthy of an education at all, and whether at the end of this, their prospects will actually be improved. It's quite a powerful thing. But you can also do the opposite, and this is the compelling part for me. You can also do the opposite with the way we interact with each other. We can also help people realize that they can cope and manage against all odds. And this is the difficulty. Many teachers are under so much pressure that this everyday interaction becomes perfunctory, and we lose these brief opportunities to radically alter how young people think about themselves. My mother taught me about this when I was 7 years old. I used to go on visits with her. She was a GP in Cheadle, and I recognize that nobody south of Watford knows where that is. But anyway, I used to go on visits with her. And I would walk into rooms, and I remember telling her when I walked into these families' homes that the air is heavy in here. It's hard to breathe. And I would sit down in a living room when she was whisked upstairs to talk to whoever was sick. My mother did a lot of work with palliative care, so often it was families who had someone who wasn't going to get better. And I would sit there, and back in the 70s, as this was, when the doctor visited, you get out your best china. And so I would sit there as a 7-year-old, holding a cup and saucer, my hands shaking, and I would look around at these families, their hands shaking, holding a cup and saucer for them because of the stress of what was going on around them. And I started to associate the stress of these visits with this noise, this rattle of china on china. Then my mother would come downstairs and she would stop in the doorway, always. And she would scoop up the room in her attention. Just look at them in such a way that it was so clear, even for a 7-year-old, that I've been somewhere before this, and I'm going somewhere after this. But right now, for the 3 minutes I have with you, there is only you. And she'd sit down, take her cup and saucer, and her hands would be steady as a rock. And then they would fire at her, Dr. Amaechi, I don't know how I can cope, how am I going to manage, what am I going to do? And she would let them talk and let them vent. And then she would say, you can do this. This is what we're going to do, this and this and this, and I'll see you in a week. And they would say, you don't understand, Dr. Amaechi. And then she would just like wave her hand in front of them. No, you can do this, and this is how. You're going to do this and this and this, and I will see you in a week. And to my surprise, as a 7-year-old, it stopped. You're right, Dr. Amaechi. We can do this. I'll do this and this and this, and I'll see you in a week. And my jaw just dropped every time. Like, this is amazing. This is magic. This was in 1977, and in 1977, the very best thing in the world, probably to this day, happened. And that is that the first and original Star Wars movie came out. And I went to see that film with my mum. My sisters didn't go, they didn't care. They didn't know the power of the Force. And I went to that film, and then I'm sat next to her, it's dark, we're eating popcorn and sharing a big thing of Coke. And about 42 minutes and a half into that film, approximately, there is a scene that changed everything for me. That's the scene where Obi-Wan Kenobi and Luke Skywalker are in the speeder, and they're heading into Mos Eisley, and the stormtroopers stop them. And I'm like, this is a ridiculous film. It's going to end now. The hero is about to die. And the stormtroopers inquire about the droids, and Obi-Wan Kenobi looks at them and says, these aren't the droids you're looking for. And they repeat back, these aren't the droids we're looking for. You can move along. Move along, move along, and they escape and save the universe. And I missed the next 10 minutes of Star Wars the first time I saw it because I'm just staring into the side of my mother's face. Because I'm like, I have seen that before. And after a few seconds of me staring in the side of her face, she's reaching out for more popcorn, and she looks at me. And she sees my incredulous face, mouth agape. And she just looks at me and goes... So from the age of 7, I knew one thing for sure, and that was that my mother was a Jedi. And even better news for me, it meant that I would be a Jedi too. And I thought it was that unique. And then, of course, that's the reason I studied psychology. It was as close as I could get to being a Jedi. We are in a situation where we need more Jedis. More everyday Jedis who can look into the faces of those who are confused, confounded, given messages by the rest of the world that they are inferior, unable to cope, are the problem, and reflect back at them with persistence and empathy that they can indeed prevail. Any one of these other kind of interventions can help make schools structurally better, policy-wise better, you name it, better. But fundamentally, we need to give our teachers resilience so that the energy that is required to be everyday Jedi every second of every day is available to them. Because this is what will change our educational system. This is what will change the outcomes of our young people. This is what will impact the differentiation between outcomes for different types of young people. I scoff about it too, but the fact is that my entire career is predicated on the idea that I know that if I am mindful and attentive for the briefest of moments, I can make radical impacts. I'm a psychologist because of that. And I work with schools because of that. And I believe that if we can help teachers to regain some of that in the face of, I know, criticism and scapegoating and whatever else, we can change the outcomes in our schools. So I've gone a little over, but we've got some time, and I wanted to give an opportunity for you to ask some questions, because I know this is kind of a weird presentation for many people about becoming a Jedi, but I'm sincere in it, and I can't see anything past these lights, so you'll have to tell me if anybody wants to grab a microphone. it would be a disappointing state of affairs if I have neither pissed off nor inspired anybody enough to ask a question.
Oh. Hello, thank you. My name is Lucy Crahan. How do I become a Jedi?
Honestly, this is not rocket science. This is simply a question of our mindful proactive attention. We've got to a point now where we believe in a couple of things that are really damaging us. We believe in pivotal moment theory, that not every moment that we have with people or in any circumstance are important. Jedi, everyday Jedi, they believe that every moment, every interaction is potentially the one that will change everything. That potentially any interaction, knowing how subjective they are, you may think it inconsequential, they may experience it as if it is a footprint in the wet cement of their brain. Something that happened fleetingly, but will never depart from their consciousness. If you approach every interaction you have with the idea that your dismissal will be a footprint in the brain of somebody that will impact their behaviors further down the line, their likelihood to go to authority figures, their likelihood to resent education, their likelihood to, you name it. If you regard the idea that when people come to you, even if it is just fleeting, even if it is just so many of those interactions that we have that are 6 seconds, 8 seconds, less, that in every one of those, you might make a radical difference to somebody. If you do that, amazing things happen. Because you suddenly realize that it doesn't matter how consequential you think the interaction, it is how consequential it is experienced. If there's another question, I can't tell because I can't see.
Hi, my name is Barry. I'm a history teacher. I'd like to know how you would combat anti-intellectualism in our schools.
I'm angry again now. Thank you for that. I'm unsure. I wish I had a pithy answer. I'm unsure, because it seems like the ways that we would normally defeat anti-intellectualism with rationalism, with evidence and explanation. But the problem with anti-intellectualism is that it openly disavows that. In fact, if you use words that contain more than 2 syllables to explain any nuanced property, you define yourself as elite and not worthy of being listened to by many people. I mean, this is the ridiculous situation we're in, where we have an education system deeply under stress, and yet the only way that we actually solve this problem is by making sure that young people coming up experience education in such a way that knowledge in of itself, that education in of itself, that learning in of itself is valued in a very different way than it is with some people, certainly some adults. So once again, there you go. It's how we do that. I'm not sure that I wish I had something pithier, but I don't think there's a simple answer to it, because at the moment, it's too convenient to blame experts. Never in my life ever did I think I would hear a member of the cabinet say the words, "I think we've heard too much from experts." I'm a director of a hospital group in Manchester, and it's funny, I almost never hear that from a patient. But somehow it's acceptable in education.
Hello, my name's Andrew, and I specialise in neurological disorders, and I go into schools and I help teachers and teaching assistants work with young people as effectively as they can. Mm-hmm. And I'm not a Star Wars fan, but I'm a big Star Trek fan. I wanted to be Captain Kirk, not Spock. But sometimes I wish I was Spock, because if I could mind meld with them, I could find out what they're really thinking and what they really want help with, not what they think they want help with, and I could give them all the information that I think they could be helped with. How do you feel about that?
I am unsure that that's entirely necessary. Psychology, different psychological techniques love to laud themselves, but the truth is we've known for a long time that no one type of psychological intervention, CBT, whatever it is, humanism, is any more effective than any other. And then you look at the underlying common denominators and you realize that success criteria is based on the idea that whoever it is, young people in your case, look at you and believe you want to help, believe you are willing to help. You put in place a structure that is believable but not necessarily true. And that you are willing to help them craft a vision for the future that is better than this one. There's a number of other denominators as well, but I just think that part of what makes us effective is not that we know everything about what's going on in mind. Sometimes when someone comes to you and they want to solve another problem or a false problem before they solve the real problem, that is just part of their process, and we have to go through that, as frustrating as it is. Many of us, many of you teachers, will have had the experience of looking at a child and knowing, you're talking to me about something, this is not your problem, this is not what you want to talk about. GPs have that same issue, especially with male patients, where a patient will come in with a sore throat or a scratchy neck or something else, and this is all in the 8 minutes before they will make a decision as to whether they can talk to you about the thing that really matters. In those minutes that they have with you, they are talking about this nonsense phantom something that's wrong with them to determine if you're the kind of person I can talk to about my prostate. The sensitive stuff that we have, we just don't want to throw out there on the table, even to an expert. We want to throw it out to an expert who's actually interested in us as a person. And I think it's a necessary part of the process. I often think many of the ways we go wrong, in social science, certainly, is by trying to shortcut processes to make them more convenient for us, rather than making them more effective for our clients.
Hi, John. My name is Gillian Hamden-Thompson. I'm a fellow Penn State alum, so I'm really delighted to listen to you speak today, so welcome. My question is to do with young people who might be described as disaffected youth, or they may sit on the fringes as some way of society. What programs and strategies have you felt have worked effectively with these groups?
I'm quite a fan of self-determination theory. I don't know if people are familiar with this, but the idea that there's a motivational spectrum from amotivation all the way through to the holy grail of intrinsic motivation. Along the way, there's this area of identified regulation, it's called, where a person, in this case, a disaffected, terrible, like you, I choke on that word a little bit, but a young person who might be on the fringes, who will never really be interested in the core of education, perhaps never really interested in the subjects they have to take in order to pass certain criteria. At this identified regulation point, they don't care about the subject, but they have found someone, not necessarily the teacher or the person of that subject, but they have found someone in the school who means enough to them, and that person has made enough of an effort to make an authentic connection. Not friendship, not nice, not pleasant, an authentic connection. And because of that authentic connection, because this subject, my success, my attendance, my behavior is important to this person, it's important to me. So the actual behavior itself, they may have no connection to. The actual class, lesson, whatever it is. I think this is why how we interact is really important, because even when you're not the subject teacher for someone, remarkably small interactions can connect you with someone. And that's what I think we can do to help draw people from the fringes, find ways to connect them. Some people do it through sport, but all they're doing, I mean, it's not necessarily the idea that sport teaches all these lessons. It's just not true. Fred Coulter, a host of other researchers, say that the evidence for sport is equivocal at best, that it delivers these respect and whatever else outcomes. But what you have done is created a person who connects to the young person, the coach, whoever, who is interested and is connected to the goal, and because that person is connected to the goal, therefore the young person is connected to the goal.
Hi. My name is Joe. Mine's more on the sporting side of things.
Okay?
2 parts. Firstly, how did you find being an Englishman in the NBA? And secondly, did you find there was sort of an anti-intellectual stigmatism in NBA culture and how that affected young Americans looking at their role models?
I think there's an anti-intellectual bent in America that we're borrowing. And I think it's purposeful because it's going to get people elected. Terrible, terrible people elected. I was very unusual. They found me very unusual in the NBA, but they welcomed it, to be honest. They thought it was odd that I drank tea before games. One of the things about going to America for me was that I think I became far more British when I went to America than I was when I was here. Suddenly tea became just essential, and now I'm addicted. But those things were really, they were used as like a hook, because one of the things, and this is, I mean, if I was giving you the full spiel on collegiate, proactive collegiality, one of the things about being on a team that is different from being amongst a group of talented individuals is the idea that people look at you beyond your job description. It's not just what you can do in your work. They look and see other ways that you can contribute. And those other ways included the quirks and the idiosyncrasies that I had, some part because I'm English, and some part just because I'm slightly weird. And they embraced it, they really did. I would tell you that some of the conversations I have had at 30,000 feet on a team plane in the NBA would put to shame, to absolute shame, the debates that I've heard in politics over the last 3 years in America and in this country. I remember a conversation on race that was deeply profound, that really looked at some of the structural aspects rather than the usual personal experiences. And so I think part of what makes people in sport anti-intellectual is that we like our sportsmen to be dumb. It's why most of the time that I do things with groups that haven't heard me talk before, I usually roll out my qualifications first, because otherwise people just sit there going, what? This is smart? So, you know, we cause that problem for ourselves. I wish we could free them up to be more sophisticated, holistic role models. I really do.
Hi, sir. I'm a student here, Niels. I had the honor of showing you around and bringing you here, actually. And I really figured that you're actually the Jedi that you were trying to show us. And it's you as a person. And that's why my question is, where do you get the energy from to be the same amazing, nice person to everyone? Because it just seems difficult.
I will pay you the 50 quid for that later. Please be clear on this. I think we are too liberal with the idea that certain people are special. Right? Do not make that mistake. I thought that when I was 7. I thought I was a unicorn. I thought I was the only one. I thought that when I was 16 years old, my mother would come to me and sit me down around the dining room table and talk to me about, now I'm a Jedi and I have to go off to some special school. And I thought I'd be the only one. And it's a lie. There is vigilance required to do what I'm talking about. It is sometimes irritating to realize that every interaction, the person who holds the door for you, the person who brings you to a place, the whoever, could be impactful. But you just have to realize the rewards of it are radical. I realized this, my first year in the NBA was in Cleveland. The only reason I was on Cleveland's team is because they were terrible. They were truly terrible. And I was terrible, and we were a match. And in Cleveland, before I even moved into a house, I lived they put me up in the hotel in the center of Cleveland, right next to the arena. And in that in that, in that complex, there's a mall with this amazing fountain that I still find fascinating when I see them, where on every hour, the fountain would jump and move with lights and music, and I just thought this was amazing. So I would go down there. It was my meditative moment, if you like. And because I was terrible and Cleveland was terrible, nobody cared who I was, even though I wore my Cleveland Cavalier stuff everywhere because I wanted everybody to know, by the way, I'm that guy. And I was sat down watching it once, and suddenly this large black lady starts running towards me. And I can see behind her she is dragging her son. And in her hand, she has a napkin from Panera Bread, which only Americans would know what that is. It's a tremendous place. It's like Good Greg's. And very clearly, this sandwich, this napkin has had a sandwich in it at some point, because I look at it as she approaches, and it's still on one corner, it's all droopy with mayonnaise. And she looks at me and she says, "Will you sign this for my boy?" And I look behind her, and there's a meek-looking boy doing the thing that boys do when mums do this stuff, which is like, "Mom." And I said, "Of course," because I'm that guy, right? And so I sign it, trying to avoid the mayonnaise, and I hand it back over. But instead of handing it to her, I reach around her and hand it to him, and I shake his hand. And then I walk away, and I'm thinking, that's cool, I'm special. And I walk away, and for some reason, as I'm walking away, I stop and I turn back, and this woman is now trying to drag this boy through, but he is rooted to the ground. In one hand, slightly mayonnaise-y signature. And in the other hand, he has it in front of his face, and he is just staring at it, like he's been touched by God. And I looked at this situation, and it suddenly dawned on me. If there had been a place to sit down, I would have sat. It's like, I am a terrible basketball player on a terrible team that no one else in this mall cares about. And yet I just turned a piece of rubbish into a piece of magic. I just shook someone's hand, and now they are looking at it as if it has been changed forever. And I know that you will think, many of you, that this is a sports person thing or whatever else, but please understand, for every Mr. Stewart, there's a Mr. Greg, my biology teacher, who I would go to, not because he taught me any classes, because he didn't actually in my time at my school, but because every time I sat with him, even briefly, even every time I caught him in a hallway, I would look at his face, and it reflected back at it would be my potential. This is how we can radically change our environment. Yes, it's exhausting. But that's something that teachers are unfamiliar with. We can do this. We can be everyday Jedi. It's not about our technical skill and ability, that is a given. But it is about finding a way to resource ourselves to be more resilient, so that we know that in every moment it is pivotal. Every moment can be the time where your word is a footstep in their wet cement. Thank you.